Okay, so we are live. Let's start the session. We are continuing with our, just a minute. I will open the PPT. Okay, share screen. Okay, we are continuing with our MDI 007 in terms of labor and labor markets. In fact, I keep repeating this every unit. The reason why economics and theories on labor and labor markets is a whole subject in this migration and diaspora is because of the fact that a large amount of migration is caused because of economic reasons. In fact, what going to do in this particular unit is going to do a tie back. And I'll tell you how I'm doing a tie back. Just a sec. There is somebody who's okay. Let me Gurpinder, if you can mute yourself, please. One of your device is not muted. Gurpinder, if you can mute the other device, there is a voice coming. Okay. I'll tell you how I'm doing a tie back. Let's look at the tie back. So if you look at block one, you are going through block one. In unit five, the unit five is about economic determinants. We are doing MDI 007, but if you are looking at MDI 001 in block one, unit 5 is about economic determinants. And let me just go through this economic determinants. Migration cannot be attributed to any single factor. It's multicultural, multidimensional, various set of factors in which economic determinants are major motivational determinants. And that's why this whole MDI 007 is talking about economics, it's talking about labor, it's talking about labor markets. It definitely dwells in the economics part. So if you are not an economic student, most of the SLMs are slightly dense in terms of the economic subject. So rather than get stuck into those figures and those equations, look at the overview in terms of understanding how the labor itself has been understood by various scholars, and which will largely determine how migration happens. Factors have some economic aspects and dimensions related to it. This I'm reading from unit 1 of MDI 001. I'm doing a tie back. And as you will go through it, you will realize why we are doing this MDI 007. Low agricultural income, agriculture unemployment, underdevelopment, major factors in driving migrants to more rich or dynamic areas. Even when there is a political disturbance, remember the political disturbance will lead to people not following an economic criteria or an economic business. Individuals, being rational human beings, make decisions based on their own self-interest in order to maximize efficiency and earnings. Because remember, at the end of the day, everybody is earning to be able to subsist. So in a monetary economy, you need to earn money to be able to buy things. Migration also not only you earn money, but also has a significant impact on a country's economy, growth, and development. So, in fact, when people migrate, immigrants bring a lot of diversity and richness to the country, to the host country. So, all this political rhetoric that we hear about, that immigrants are bad, immigrants are this, immigrants actually provide a lot of diversity and economic growth in the country to which they go. Gurpinder, can you mute your device, please? One of your devices is not muted. Gurpinder? Okay. And interestingly, for example, India has the largest, diaspora or migrants outside India, and the amount of remittances which India gets is the highest. We are almost getting about 60 billion in terms of remittances. Okay, there is one more device which is connected to you, Gurpinder. I think it's your mobile phone or something. Now, economic migration are influenced by a variety of macro and microeconomic features. And as we are going through this MDI 007, we are looking at how the labor movement is happening and so on and so forth. Stocks and flow of migrants, wage rates in destination. This will already come to you in the introductory MDI 001. So for people who are joining new, because we have, for the older people, we have already gone through MDI 001, or possibly, it'll restart. I'm giving you a tie back why we are doing MDI 007. Say there is this chart which I picked it up from a Routledge book in terms of there are something called push factors, there are something called pull factors. These are some keywords as you go through in earlier units you will go through, because we are already in a motion forward. These are some keywords you will keep listening to over and over again in the units. So there are some push factors, economic push factors. There are some pull factors. Push factors pushes people from home countries. Pull factors are factors which pull people into host countries. So there are economic factors. These are non-economic factors. Now coming to Unit 8 is about institutional approaches. So till now, we have been doing various approaches, economic approaches to labor, the classical approach, the neoclassical approach. More often than not, most of these economics as a subject of study and all these approaches started with as the economy moved towards industrialization. And once economic moved towards industrialization, the whole world moved towards industrialization. Scholars, especially economists, were trying to figure out how to classify labor, because you can classify capital, you can classify land. How do you classify labor? So initially, when the industrialization started, labor was considered another, input like land or capital. Subsequently, as time passed, more and more people were able to understand the fact that because labor is an embodiment of human beings, you cannot separate labor from human beings. Labor cannot be worked the same way as possibly land and capital. Also, you need to understand initially, because capitalism was only about production for profit, they did not worry about, or they did not care about the people who were involved in making of goods. That is the reason why the whole concept of growth is different from development, and the whole world is veering towards the concept of development, which involves the development of the labor involved in the production of goods. Also, in classical and neoclassical, they were talking about purely in terms of supply and demand. Whereas, and in the supply and demand, it was the individual actors or the individual labor, which was, the focus of study. Subsequently, the scholars realized that they are not just individuals, there is more to studying of labor. And that is where institutional approaches come in. So what are the institutional approaches? Our objectives is to understand what constitutes institutional economics, familiarize with institutional. What are institutions? In fact, this word institutions have been thrown or spoken multiple times. So what are institutions? Institutions are a system of established and prevalent social rules that structure social interactions. And these institutions took some time to get established as human beings got civilized, or as the world and societies got civilized, these institutions came in. For example, the institution of marriage. Why is there an institution of marriage? The institution of marriage purportedly is the fact that once with this institution, the offspring of people, the offspring of of human beings will be taken care of. So that's how these institutions were formed. Language, money, law, systems of weight, measures, table manners, and firms are all institutions. Not classified as institution, and institutions could be formal and informal. Stopping here, please remember you can stop me at any moment of time by interrupting or raising an hand or putting it in a chat to add something or to ask me a question. We are pretty free formatted in this Zoom class. So you can stop me to add something or to ask a question. I'll try and my best to reply in the best possible way. Formal institutions include constitutions, statutes, contracts. Informal includes convention, normal culture. For example, the marriage is a convention. And that's where you will understand because of the fact, let's say the institution of marriage has been formed over a long period of time. And more often than not, the formal understanding of marriage is between a man and a woman to produce an offspring because the whole institution of marriage was understood to take care of the offspring. Now, in the 21st century, when there are people who hear the fact that there is a man marrying another man or a woman marrying another woman in terms of LGBTQI, they are not able to come up to terms and they are that's where the ideology comes in trying to determine whether it's right or it's wrong. Actually, right and wrong are perspectives which human beings acquire, but you would now understand why when you have institutions formal or informal, why when people have a problem in terms of understanding this change of institutions. New classical economics talks about individual and free market. Even classical economics talks about individuals and free market. Prices determined by supply and demand assures a self-organized, efficient economic system. Whereas institutional economics views every economic decision, for example, decision making is embedded in institutional context. Now, also understand the fact, and as you will go through this course, you will realize migration is not an individual decision. More often than not, it appears to be an individual decision, but there is an institutional decision in it. For example, when one individual decides to migrate, there is an institution of family, there's an institution of caste, there's an institution of extended family, kinship. In a village, there is in a rural sector, there is an institution of caste or the village. How based on all that, an individual takes decisions. In fact, in earlier units, you will read that basically there is a large role of institutions in decide for an individual to decide about migration. It's not an easy thing. Now, institutional economics itself is classified into old and new. Your SLM has gone into detail on, when I say SLM, self-learning module, has gone into detail on old and new. I have kept it as, brief as possible. As I said, I have kept most of these PPTs in tune with the fact that a lot of students may not, or a lot of people in the course may not have any background on economics. So the idea is not to get stuck on the subject, but have a larger understanding of the various aspects of the subject. So institutional economics is old and new. Old institutional economics, one of the pioneers was J.R. Commons institution as a collective action in control, liberation, and expansion of individual action. So institution can also control, but at the same time, an institution can also liberate and expand human individual action. In fact, when you will study this course, you will also realize one of the reasons why diaspora gets formed, which becomes an institution, is because let's say you are going into a foreign culture, an alien culture. Now, if you have an organization out here, formal or informal, which becomes your own, in the sense you meet people who can speak your language, you meet people who follow the same culture or who have the same dressing style, there is a sense of security and there's a sense of belonging. Otherwise, think about the fact when the indentured labor were taken and dumped into a foreign location, how difficult it would have been for them to make sense of their surroundings. And remember, when the indentured labor were taken from India and dumped into various British colonies to work in the plantations, what they carried with them formed their ecosystem, gods and goddesses or cultural symbolism, and they practice rituals, what they used to do at home to get a sense of security and serenity in the surroundings, a comfort in the surroundings. So it is a sense of liberation. And also remember, it's an expansion. Think about the fact that in a mob, a tame individual also becomes a bully. Collective action ranges all the way from unorganized customs to many organized ones, such as family, corporation, trade association, trade union, state. State is also in form of a collective action. Principle common to all of them is greater or lesser control, liberation, and expansion of individual action by collective action. Always there is power in numbers. So this is the old institutional economics. New builds on the idea but incorporates more rigorous economic analysis. New institutional economics looks at how institutions reduce uncertainty and transaction cost. In fact, the institutions actually reduce uncertainty. The institutional marriage reduces uncertainty for the child. Now there is a stable place to call home, helping to explain why certain structures like firms or market, reason why these institutions exist. It often combines insight from economics, sociology, and political science. Again, difference between old and new. Old is about understanding institutions qualitatively and historically, while new applies more quantitative methods to analyze how institutions function and affect economic performance. So a lot of mathematical models were created, formulas were brought in. In fact, in your SLMs, there is some equations, there is some graphs. If you're not an economic student, again, as I said, do not get stuck in it. Understand the larger aspect of it. You can always, in case you decide to, study more about economics, you can always look at that. So, what is the institutional aspect of labor market? Is labor a commodity or something that is embodied in human being? In fact, this question has been coming up in various units of classical, neoclassical, Marxism, and so on and so forth. Fundamental question seems to be amongst principal concern that has been driven solely attention towards institutional role in the labor market. If labor is viewed as a commodity, then labor market can be devoid of institution like labor laws. In fact, when classical economics was being put forward, labor, they did not look at human beings as human beings. They considered human beings as labor and labor as a commodity. And like other commodities of land and capital, it should be basically institutions looked at as supply and demand. In fact, what justified slave trade. That is what justified indentured labor, because human being was supply and demand. You could pick up a human being from any place and throw it in any place, and you could make it work. But as civilization progressed and more people looked into the aspect of labor, looked into the aspect of industrialization, of civilization, they realized the fact that no, this is not the way it goes about. Because after all, remember, it's the story of human beings. When human beings are writing that story, it is the story of human beings. So, human beings, you have to look at it more than just a commodity. And that is why the institutional aspects of labor market came in. New classical looked at labor as an exchangeable commodity. And if it is a commodity, then wage tends to be determined by supply and demand. But we also realize the fact that because it is not, a commodity, there is a human being involved. Human beings has his likes, dislikes, moods. It's a subjective thing. There needs to be decent working and living conditions. And if there is a decent working and living conditions, then obviously some laws need to be put out there. Key attributes of neoclassical is subjective value. Subjective. Now, look at it this way. When you put a subjective value of goods and services by the consumer, inevitably you are reducing the labor to just a commodity, because now you can replace labor. After all, the price of the good will be determined by the consumer. So any labor can come in. That is where how, then scholars said that's not the way it works, because inevitably skilling of labor, quality of labor is changed, because it is determined by the human being. If we posit that labor is embodied in human being, valuing labor is not merely soluble by supply and demand. Rather, evaluating working and living conditions of labor becomes important for sustaining amicably and a fair system of labor relation. Because if the human being which is providing that labor is not well taken care of, the product will not be good. For this, apart from market forces, labor market entails institutions to facilitate a sustained industrial relation. So that is why if your working conditions are good, more often than not, you provide a good output. So whether you are doing a physical labor or you're doing an intellectual labor, if your working conditions, and that is why if you see the new technology companies are providing, nap spaces, game spaces, there are couches. Idea is to provide a cool working place, because now the labor is working more with his mind, his or her mind, rather than his or her body. Yes, Karthike.
Sir, sorry to break
No,
the flow of the class.
absolutely, absolutely not.
Just wanted to come in at the last comment that you made. And sir, I just wanted to say that, even though companies make such spaces for for their laborers to be able to work in a more sustainable environment, but as someone who is in the labor market and is working, I can tell you that most of it is only on paper. If you
Hmm.
make use of those spaces,
Hmm.
like a pool table or a gaming space for more than like 15-20 minutes, I'm pretty
Hmm.
sure one is going to get an email from HR that
You are
you
spending too much of time.
exactly.
Because they go
Yeah,
somewhere down the line, Karthike, somewhere down the line, we are still hardwired for looking at people as a commodity.
indeed. Yeah.
And as I said, more often than not, the see, irrespective of the fact that we have reached a 21st century where we understand the fact that it's finally the human beings which determines the success or failure of a project, of a technology, of everything, we still focus on the technology and not the human being.
Hmm.
That is somewhere, I think it is a part, it has become a part of the DNA of human being to look at. So look at a very small thing. You do let's say a small house painting or a house repair. You are
Hmm.
willing to spend more money on the hardware than on the labor. You will negotiate with the labor in terms of the cost. You will not negotiate in terms of the hardware.
Hmm.
You see,
Correct.
so
Yeah.
somewhere down the line, it has to do with the basic way, our thought processes have been. made or evolved or normalized over a period of time
Hmm.
that we tend to still look at, irrespective of the fact that we understand. So, if you look at the fact, we still tend to, as a political discourse, talk about the development of of a country in GDP terms, where we realize the fact that GDP has nothing to do with development.
Hmm.
It is only an economic growth.
Correct.
But also understand that is because of the fact human beings is easy to understand quantity rather than quality, because quality is very difficult to measure, and
Hmm.
that is why everything goes in terms of numbers, because that is very easy to manipulate and measure. So that is to do with the human being. uh, Besides the fact, you are absolutely right. Though more and more companies try, as I said, they try. For example, multinationals now look at having a counselor on board. They are looking at mental health. Schools are also trying. Also, remember, this is a continuous process. There is never a time when the process has reached its fruition. It's a continuous process, because there are multiple negotiations at play. Karthikeyan?
Yes, sir. Indeed.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So, labor laws is a classical institution impacting labor markets for more than a century. Formation and coverage of labor laws varies across countries. There are collectives such as trade unions, labor movements, ILOs. For example, if you see, the farm laws was brought in by the Indian government. The farmer organizations, especially in UP, Haryana, and Punjab, had major objections to it. They came out to protest. The protest went on for 1 year. The farm laws were taken back. So there is an institutional way this negotiation happens, including organizations like ILO, International Labor Organizations, comes out with conventions, right to organize, collective bargaining convention. Remember one thing, these negotiations are ongoing negotiations. There's never a state in the human history or the story of human being that we say that we have reached a point which is, remember, there never can be a stationary point, because stationary leads to decay. So there is always a continuous negotiation back and forth. The phrase right to work was coined by French socialist leader Louis Blanc, 1846. So if you again, as I said, we learn a lot of our history. Passing of time, right has gained importance. One of the human rights is considered fulfillment of basic necessity. In fact, our Manrega was based on the right to work, the right to employment, right to work, and Manrega, or now it is called it is Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Scheme, 100 days of work in the rural areas. Then there is a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 23.1 recognizes right to work. Everybody has the right to work. International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights recognizes the right to work. At the end of the day, every human being, every able human being should have is having the right to work. In fact, our Article 43 of Indian Constitution says the same thing. All workers, agriculture, industry, or otherwise, work a living wage, conditions of work, ensure a decent standard of living. Now, a lot of you might say that, oh, this works only on paper, or it. Again, remember the way the human, society or the various institutions or states function of the fact is the fact that there is an intent, and then you follow up with that intent. And as human beings civilized and society civilized, these intentions were very important in being put on paper, which becomes then a guiding force. There are always cases where individual leaders, states do not follow it, but that's an aberration which happens in the history of the world. So I picked up this right of labor under the Indian Constitution. There are various articles. Article 14 and 19 is in terms of fundamental rights, uh, basically also talks about equal before the law. These are fundamental rights. There are other rights in terms of directive principles, but they all point towards, you can look at rights of laborers. Similarly, there are, these acts: Trade Union Act, Minimum Waging Act, Child Labor Act, Bonded Labor Act. There is a possibility they may not be followed. For example, Child Labor Act prohibits the employing of children. But if you see, in fact, a lot of educated middle class employs children in their homes, or factories employ children still. But there are all these institutions which have been created to protect children, or to protect minimum wages, or to protect people from being taken as bonded labor. So these are laws which are there in the system as an institution. Let's look at some institutional aspects of the labor market. Uh, uh, Important contexts that make institutional growth significant is the information asymmetry. Information about quality of job seekers and quality of job opportunities uncertain. And say, for example, today you get a job after showing a degree or a certificate. But the degree of or the certificate does not ensure that the quality of you as a candidate for labor is up to the mark of the company that wants it. In fact, there might be people who, without the degree or the certificate, might have a better quality than you. Some talented candidates are likely to be rejected by employers since information about talent and capability is uncertain. Qualitatively, it's very difficult to manage. So we go in for quantity. So a quantity could be a degree or a certificate. So you have a degree, you are a graduate, you are entitled for a job. This is also an institutional aspect of the labor market. Then the labor market has an external labor market and an internal labor market. External is when jobs are coming from outside, whereas matching job seekers and job opportunities, whereas the internal labor market space for a person who's already in a job. ELM is more flexible, driven by competitive forces of supply and demand. So, you have a particular job, let's say a job of an accountant. There are 100 applicants. You have to kind of figure out which is the best fit for the particular job. ILM is much more constrained because opportunities become precious and scarce as you go up. So these are again a part of the labor market. As I said, the unit gives you an overview about the institutional aspects. And we also will look at the fact that when you go into a particular subject, there are multiple nuances of the subject. More often than not, as I keep repeating, academics and scholarly pursuit are always giving more perspectives to anything that we have seen and experienced. And more often than not, when we get different perspectives, we enrich ourselves with understanding a subject better. Global institutions such as labor laws define employment relations. Institutions include codified laws, statutes, explicit contracts. For example, the Minimum Wage Act of 48 is an example of institutional defined terms as a cost of living index, employer, employee, wages, and scheduled employment. Everything is codified. Then there is something called an Industrial Dispute Act 47. Whether it is followed or not is a separate thing. But this is an institution which has been there by law. Prevention and settlement of industrial dispute, works committee consisting of representative of employer and workmen. Industrial tribunal consisting of one or more members, qualification of judge. So this is an institution, Industrial Dispute Act. Industrial tripartite committee is an example of institution. Government of India established industrial committee for select industries. Government representative of employees, representative work trade. A lot of sometimes you will see a media reports. Basically, for example, During the farmer agitation, during the farmer union agitation, a lot of media reports tried to, paint those farmer associations as disruptive, paint them as, anarchy. We need to understand that that is how institutions negotiate. This is a part of the negotiation. So either the negotiation could be in a closed room, or it comes out in a democracy in the form of an agitation. Both forms are legit in a democracy. uh, Core objective of committee is to safeguard industrial peace through dialogue and fair solution. At the end of the day, because of the fact it was clearly determined that human being which supplies labor is cannot be treated as other commodity of capital and land, there has to be much more which needs to be done for the human being. There needs to be dialogue, there needs to be fair solution. And that is why workers' collective, trade unions, federation of trade unions tend to bargain with employers' collective for settlement of wages. And we have also seen in earlier unit that these unions do a collective bargain for wages, but also they are able to provide stable employment or stable labor for the companies. Think about the fact, if companies has to go every time to acquire labor, what typically is happening today? In a contractual system, people keep moving back and forth. Now you are never assured of a continuous supply of good quality labor. And that's what, that's where the difference between employment and contractual systems come in. So that negotiation is happening. This phenomena is called collective bargaining. Apart from law, trade unions, special form of contract, there are informal social institutions that shape labor market. There are informal social institutions. Pepola in 2012 study in India labor market outcomes like employment and wage appear to be sensitive to social identity of persons, particularly caste. Caste becomes a very important factor in India. In fact, strangely, a lot of media reports from the US now is talking about caste discrimination, because all these Indians who traveled from India to US to work out there carry their caste form of discrimination. Identities like caste appear to account for discrimination in Indian labor market. Then Nihila, Uni, Nitha, they're all researchers provide evidence for discrimination against women. Women are increasingly being absorbed in informal sector. In fact, in the IT sector or advertising sector, which or publishing sector, where there is a large amount of women workforce, if you do a research, or they would be there'd be researchers, women are discriminated against. Women are employed in particular kind of service sector jobs, paid less, consideration of women in agriculture sector. Uh, you know, topic for research, you can do your own research, you can find out, you can, talk to a maid, you can talk to other, what are the working conditions, how does it work. Labor force participation rate does not increase with higher education of women. So these were various researches in terms of informal social institutions, social networks and informal collectives, although not so tangible, actively playing, shaping the labor market, facilitating job search, migration, and information sharing. More often than not, a lot of migration from rural into the urban sectors happen due with social networks. So you go into a labor job, you will find a lot of people from the same village or from the same caste, from the same background, because there's a social network which is pulling these people out here, which is the same thing which happens in international migration. When one person goes, there is a chain migration which happens.
Uh, Sir, should I say something?
Please, who's that?
Yeah, this is Jyoti, sir.
Yeah, Jyoti. Yes,
Yeah,
Jyoti.
yeah. So actually, I feel that the social network actually works a lot while doing migration. And
Okay.
nowadays, what they are doing now, they have the WhatsApp groups.
Hmm.
So they were just sending all the information like how is the place, how is the weather, how is the situation, meaning all the information. Now the communication, um, commun- uh, they were communicating all the things through mobile and all.
Correct.
And yeah, it's a new because I find it's a new way to transfer the information.
Hmm.
Because previously people just join them and just go to that place and
Hmm.
explore the
Hmm.
situation.
Hmm.
And nowadays they were doing all the things through mobile and all.
Correct, correct. So so
Yeah.
that is how globalization is changing the way things are done, businesses are done, connections are made. In fact, in the labor market itself, you will see if there is a person of a particular caste or a particular area or a particular ethnicity will draw other people from the same caste, ethnicity, region into the workplace to make a kind of a clique. You will have this. So, for example, when the Dravidization of South India happened, Tamil Nadu happened, a lot of Tamil Brahmins came over to north, and you will see in a lot of government areas, Tamil Brahmins are there. They pulled each other in. So there is, it does, participation gets affected by social networks. Institutional aspects of development north compares. So there is an example which is given in the SLM about two economic systems, England and Portugal, and how institutional aspects affect development. When assessing history of this country, north uses institutional framework. Portugal was more advanced in maritime explosion in the 15th century than England, whereas England became more industrially advanced nation while Portugal remained a developing nation. And how did this happen? This happened as follows. The Portugal was not able to upgrade its institutional capabilities. For example, the church and the state was not separated in Portugal, whereas they got separated in England. That is where, remember in the earlier side, we read that the institution also empower and expand an individual capacity. So unless the institution, and today one of the reasons which dragged India down, the institution of the informal social institution of caste, a lot of times it is able to empower, but at the same time, it is able to drag down a lot of modernity which the country could have expressed or experienced. Lackadaisical institutional changes in Portugal existed with feudal inclined property rights, less developed knowledge system, slow emergence of capitalist class. So you see, institutions affect countries, affect communities, affect societies, and as institutions keep pace with with the way the society moves, it empowers the society, the community, the country, and so on and so forth. In contrast to the case of Portugal, England presents a scenario of sustained economic growth emanated from changes in formal and informal institutions, could innovate a bicameral parliamentary democratic system, reformative changes, property rights, enterprising capitalist class. And that is how England moved ahead. Portugal got left behind. So, not did this study. Okay, we are very much on time. Summing up, institutional approach for labor and development focuses on institutions such as law, regulation, organized practice, shape labor markets, role of formal and informal institution. Key aspect include labor market institutions, law and regulations, affect wages, employment levels, workers' rights, economic institution, role of property rights, governance, regulatory frameworks, social institutions, impact of culture. And remember, in a development process, everything has to move. You cannot have one aspect moving and the second aspect held on. So if you are having a modern capitalist class, then the second institution of, let's say, the caste, if it is stationary and not moving, will hold it back. Policy implication, then obviously the legal side, the policy side, if it is not in tune with what is happening in the world, you tend to get stuck. For example, the decriminalization of homosexuality. It needed till now to happen. It could have done it much earlier. Remember the fact all this homosexuality and criminality came with the British, the Victorian era. We should have let go of it much earlier. But again, these are processes which happen. Overall, the approach highlights the effective institutional are crucial for aligning labor dynamics and broader development goals. Summing up, there are some references, there are more references to traditional axes of exclusion effect, where the path leads the role of caste. You can read more in your SLMs once they come on to you. I stop here. Any questions you wish to ask? Let me put on my video.
Sir,
Hi, guys.
I have a small query.
Yes, Bashir.
What is the definition of labor? Because technically, every person who works for another person is a labor. That would
Correct.
include every sort of employee,
Correct.
even though he may be our cabinet secretary.
Correct.
So, am I correct?
Yes, absolutely, Bashir, you're absolutely right. Labor, what we understand normally is one who does physical labor. But labor, as a definition, is any person who's working, which could be manual or which could be intellectual. So every person who's working is a labor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
How do different institutions model across countries compare in terms of labor market outcome? Domingos, so again, so for example, let's look at institution of, and a lot of these institutions across countries come out from larger conventions of, let's say, UN or ILO. So if ILO convention talks about not allowing children and women to work, then the Indian government passes on the child working prohibition law. So more often than not, these conventions help. And then remember, today in a globalized situation, no country wants to stand out. So there is some universal laws out of which most of these institutions function. A lot of countries are still out of step with the global laws. For example, today, largely uh, 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 globally, there is an understanding on LGBTQ rights. Yet, a lot of, let's say, a lot of African countries still oppose LGBTQ rights. And now these typically are based on individual societies, and more often than not, politics of those societies. Somewhere down the line, these are all negotiations, how they work. Domingos?
Yes, sir, I got it.
And then also understand today all countries are competing with each other. So, for example, if your institutions are out of step with the global, conditions, then more often than not you will get hit. So, for example, there was suddenly in the world there was a large awareness of these sweatshops where they would employ this trafficked individuals to produce low cost equipment. Then there was this large movement of people who advocated that there should be all these big companies should go in for ethical manufacture, which led to all these companies changing their internal laws not to give contracts to these sweatshops, allow certain amount of good working conditions. So these are negotiations, and that's how they work. Domingos?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Sir,
Yes. Yeah, Gurpreet.
it's a movement of agricultural labor, including the small and marginal farmers, towards the cities, from the rural area towards the cities. What are the possible consequences?
Of okay, so in the subsequent unit, in the unit 10, we are doing unit 8. Unit 10 is about dual economies. Now, more often than not, traditional countries or the older economies had a large surplus workforce in agriculture.
Sir,
Also understand agriculture itself has changed. So now these surplus, so these laborers are surplus in a way because they are underemployed in agriculture. Now they will make a now these people have to decide whether they remain underemployed or they come to the cities. Now we are not the institutions in the cities are not able to provide decent wages, and more often that there is too many issues in this, in terms of working conditions, in terms of living conditions, in terms of wages. So there is a negotiation at an individual level to see whether that person needs to migrate, what are the reasons for migration, and does that migration actually benefit the family back home. And now the migration need not be from the rural areas to the urban areas, it could be from the rural areas into the international arena.
True, sir. It seems to be a push factor.
Yeah, no, and this leads to, if there is no policy formulation in terms of institutions managing this international migration, can lead to trafficking, which is happening in Punjab. We just came about all these women who were trafficked into the Middle East.
True, sir.
So societies are complex. Countries like India, which are extremely diverse, extremely populous, cannot be controlled on a very centralized way, because then there are enough cracks for people to fall in. So
Sure.
institutional mechanism has to be strengthened to take care of multiple things or multiple engines which are running. Remember, there are multiple engines which are running. And
Right.
unless institutions are able to take care of these multiple engines, inevitably then it is individual or the informal institutions which negotiate conditions leading to consequences which you cannot measure.
True, sir, but there is another trouble factor. Lot of population pressure. For example, sir, Ludhiana has absorbed out more than 100 villages, and the agriculture land has been going out. And moreover, at least 11 highways are passing through the very small state. That's already taking agriculture, fertile land out of agriculture. So this is another, sir, worrisome point.
Absolutely. Gurpreet, you also need to understand, we also need to continuously modernize agriculture, because agriculture as an industry needs to be competitive, because if it is not, inevitably the industrial part will take over agriculture.
Sir.
And because the land holdings are reducing based on the increase of population, obviously the surplus people needs to go somewhere. So when you are making a policy in terms of employment, in terms of how your India, for example, has a very positive demographic in terms of the working population. But look at the fact, we are not currently able to utilize that demographic. And
Sure.
that is why we are losing people to migration.
Sure.
So, as I said, these are multiple engines which are running, and inevitably, unless institutions are strengthened to take care of these multiple institutions, there are always people who will fall in the cracks.
Sir. Sir. Got it, sir. Sir,
Okay.
but sir, please, it's okay, sir.
आप बोलिए गुरप्रीत बोल रहे थे कुछ.
Sir, I was about to speak. Another is the trade across the border. That's the major issue.
Sorry?
Trade across the border, sir.
Trade across the border. Yes, we are not having the
We're
trade.
not able to. But this
Politics. See, there is a political factor to it. Now, those political factors, as I said, this is the continuous negotiations which have to be done. There has to be a pressure built in terms of, again, the polity. Remember, politics becomes a very important factor in a lot of migration or other decisions.
Sure.
And unless media pressure is not able to come across on the government or on the political parties, there are other issues which, it's a complicated country. It's a huge complicated country with multiple engines running.
True, sir. True. Thank you, sir.
Anyway, we have reached the end of time. Dr. Ani is already here. You have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you next Saturday at 3 o'clock. Have a wonderful Diwali. Bye, guys.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you so
Happy
much, sir.
Diwali.
Thank you so
Bye
much,
bye.
sir.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Happy
Bye.
Diwali.
Bye, guys.
Annie is here, so we will continue with the classes. Just give
Hello,
me,
everyone.
Annie, I'm making you a co-host.
Okay.
Okay, Annie, now you can share your PPT and I'm just making
Just-
live. Okay.
Yeah, just a second.